Beneath layers of dust, stone, and forgotten earth, human bones have been waiting for nearly 100,000 years. They do not speak in words, but they remember hunger, migration, injury, climate, survival, and even the vanished relatives we once shared the world with. Every skull, tooth, and broken femur carries a hidden record of how fragile humans endured disasters, ice ages, and extinction itself. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. If this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, tonight we uncover the 100,000-year secret hidden inside human bones. The ground is quiet, but it is not empty. Beneath a skin of dust, salt, roots, and compacted earth, a human body lies turned into a map. The flesh is gone. The voice is gone. The world that knew this person has vanished so completely that no name survives, no village survives, no memory passes down from mouth to mouth. Yet the bones remain, pale and patient, holding a record older than monuments, older than writing, older than the first fields of wheat or the first city walls rising in the sun. A skull rests at a slight angle, as if still listening to the soil. Ribs curve inward like the broken frame of a shelter. A thigh bone, thick with the marks of use, keeps the trace of thousands of days spent walking across uneven ground, following water, following animals, following seasons before any road existed. To an untrained eye, it is only a skeleton. To science, it is something stranger and more intimate a witness that has forgotten nothing essential. Even after losing almost everything human beings once thought mattered, around this buried body is a vanished landscape. It may have been open grassland when this person breathed, or a colder steppe, or a wooded valley where smoke from small fires drifted under a sky crowded with stars. Perhaps hyenas watched from a distance. Perhaps the dead person's companions paused long enough to cover the body, or perhaps wind and sediment did the work without ceremony. The evidence remains incomplete, and the ground rarely gives back a full story. But bones do not need writing to speak. They hold chemical traces of food and water. They hold scars from hunger and strain. They reveal where muscles pulled hard against the places where tendons attached. They preserve healed breaks, infected teeth, worn joints, childhood interruptions, and sometimes the quiet miracle of survival after an injury that should have been fatal. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, because the secret hidden inside human bones is not only the story of the dead, it is the story of how a fragile species crossed 100,000 years of danger and somehow arrived here. 100,000 years is difficult to feel. It is too long for memory and too short for geology. It is a span in which coastlines move. Deserts breathe green and then dry again. Glaciers pulse across continents, and whole human relatives disappear from the earth. It is also close enough that the people living then would not seem like monsters or myths if their faces could be restored. They had hands capable of delicate work, eyes searching the same horizons, bodies that grew tired, mouths that tasted smoke and marrow, infants that had to be carried, elders whose knowledge may have mattered when the weather turned cruel. Yet their bones belong to a world profoundly unlike the present one. Their skeletons grew under pressures most modern bodies rarely know: long-distance travel without carts, heavy lifting without machines, cold without sealed rooms, infection without antibiotics, childbirth without hospitals, and hunger that could return with the failure of a season. The secret begins with a paradox. Human beings are soft animals with unusually difficult lives. We are not the fastest, not the strongest, not armoured, not furred for deep cold, not born ready to run within hours. Our children are helpless for years. Our backs ache because upright walking balances an ancient mammal body on a difficult design. Our teeth crowd in jaws that once had more room. Our pelvises must solve the awkward problem of walking efficiently while giving birth to large-brained infants. No single explanation fully accounts for how such a creature becomes the last surviving human species. Yet the skeleton records the answer in fragments: adaptation, cooperation, endurance, invention, and luck, all written not as a triumphant march but as damage survived. Imagine one of the first scenes in this long archive, not a city, not a temple, not a battlefield, but a shoreline where early modern humans moved between dunes and tidal flats. The tide has withdrawn, leaving shellfish clinging in pools, birds rising in sudden white bursts, and wet sand firm beneath bare feet. A person bends to pry food from stone. Another carries a child against the hip. Far inland, the climate may be shifting. Rainfall patterns change. Familiar plants vanish from one valley and appear in another. Herds move. Waterholes shrink. The body responds before culture can explain what is happening. Children growing through hard years may develop thin lines in tooth enamel, microscopic pauses in the building of the body. Adults who walk farther may thicken bone in the legs. Those who survive periods of hunger carry no written memory of famine, but their skeleton may hold evidence of arrested growth, stress, and recovery. What survives in the record suggests not one dramatic disaster, but recurring pressure, the old rhythm of scarcity, movement, and temporary refuge. And still, the bones do more than record suffering. They record competence. A healed fracture is not simply proof that someone was hurt. It may also be proof that someone lived long enough to heal. In a deep-time world, healing can imply food shared, protection offered, or at least a social space where the injured were not immediately abandoned. A jaw with worn teeth may show a lifetime of tough meals, but it also shows that the mouth worked long enough to grow old by prehistoric standards. Strong finger bones can hint at gripping tools, scraping hides, shaping wood, cutting plants, or carrying burdens that left no direct trace in the soil. The skeleton is not a still object. It is the final shape of countless repeated gestures. This is why ancient bones disturb the neat stories people like to tell about progress. They do not show humanity rising cleanly from primitive misery into modern success. They show bodies constantly negotiating with the world. Sometimes they reveal strength. Many modern people have lost dense limb bones, powerful muscle attachments, feet accustomed to rough ground, jaws shaped by harder chewing. Sometimes they reveal vulnerability, infection, malnutrition, trauma, parasites, broken teeth, early death. Scholars still debate how much of this reflects environment, how much reflects culture, and how much reflects the deep inheritance of the species. But the larger pattern is unmistakable. The human skeleton is not a perfect design. It is a record of compromises that worked well enough, long enough, for one generation to leave another behind. And that is where the long journey begins, with the dead beneath the earth, holding a secret that is both ancient and living. Every bone in the modern body has a deep past inside it: the curve of the spine, the grip of the hand, the ache in the knee, the crowded tooth, the scar that heals, the child that must be carried, the endurance to walk beyond the last familiar ridge. All of it belongs to a story older than memory. The first clue is not a golden treasure or a carved inscription. It is a skeleton in silence, waiting for someone to understand that the human body itself is an archaeological site. A bone begins as living tissue, not stone. It grows, repairs, thickens, weakens, and changes with the life around it. Long before it becomes a fossil or a museum object, it is part of a breathing body, fed by blood, shaped by movement, and burdened by the weather of the world. This is why the skeleton can become a climate record without ever intending to be one. It does not describe storms or seasons in words. It does something quieter. It absorbs them. It carries the memory of hunger in its growth, cold in its proportions, movement in its density, and diet in its chemistry. The person dies. The soft body disappears, but the harder archive remains, and inside that archive are traces of landscapes that no longer exist. When scientists study ancient bones, they are not simply asking how old the person was, or whether the person was male or female, or how tall they stood. Those questions matter, but the deeper mystery is more ambitious. What kind of world made this body a skeleton from a cold region may suggest a body built with proportions that conserve heat, shorter limbs, and a compact frame appearing over long spans of adaptation. A skeleton from a warmer landscape may tell another story, with longer limbs that help release heat more easily. These are broad patterns, not simple rules, and scholars still debate how much any single skeleton can reveal. Yet across many remains, over thousands of years, the body begins to look like a negotiation between inheritance and climate. The bones also preserve stress. During childhood, when the body is still building itself, hunger and illness can interrupt growth like a storm interrupting the making of a house. Teeth are especially unforgiving witnesses. Enamel forms in layers, and when growth is disturbed, the surface may preserve faint defects, lines or pits left by periods when the body struggled. These marks do not name the disease, and they do not tell the whole story. A fever, malnutrition, weaning stress, infection, or a season of poor food may leave similar evidence. The evidence remains incomplete, but it tells us that the child lived through a disruption severe enough for the body to pause, and then, just as importantly, lived beyond it. In long bones, another kind of history can appear. The shafts of the legs and arms respond to repeated work. A person who walks immense distances over rough ground may develop strong lower limbs. Someone who throws, carries, scrapes, digs, or climbs may leave clues in the places where muscles attach. These marks are not perfect labels. A bone does not say hunter, gatherer, toolmaker, parent, or traveller. It only shows the accumulated pressure of life. Yet when many skeletons from the same place share similar patterns, the buried population begins to recover some of its rhythm. It may have moved often, it may have carried heavy loads, it may have knelt, climbed, ground seeds, processed hides, or worked with materials now vanished completely. Chemistry adds another layer. Bone and tooth can hold isotopes, tiny variations in elements that pass from water, plants, animals, and soil into the human body. Carbon and nitrogen can suggest broad patterns of diet, such as whether people relied more on certain plants, marine foods, or animal protein. Oxygen can hint at the water a person drank and through it, the climate and geography of a region. Strontium in teeth can sometimes reveal whether someone grew up in the same landscape where they died, because local rocks and soils leave chemical fingerprints that move into food and water. None of this is magic. It is careful comparison, often uncertain, often limited by preservation, contamination, and missing reference data. But when it works, a tooth can become a travel document older than writing. There is something almost unsettling about this. A person may have left no tool, no grave goods, no drawing on stone, and still their body may contain a map of movement. The enamel formed in childhood may point toward one region, while the bones remodelled later in life may suggest another. This does not always prove a dramatic migration. People move for many reasons, following herds, joining another group, escaping drought, seeking mates, returning to seasonal places, or simply living in a world where borders do not yet exist in the later sense. What survives in the record suggests that deep-time humans were not fixed figures in a still landscape. They were moving through a changing world, and the changing world was moving through them. Climate does not only shape bodies directly, it reshapes the choices available to bodies. A colder period can push animals southward or trap people near certain resources. A dry period can turn a generous valley into a corridor of danger. A wet phase can open grasslands, lake shores, and routes that later vanish under desert. Human bones from these times must be read against this restless background. A skeleton with signs of nutritional stress may belong not to a weak people, but to a strong people caught in a bad interval. A skeleton with healed injuries may belong not to a violent world alone, but to a demanding one where falls, hunts, travel, and accidents were constant companions. One of the lesser-known details is that bones are not equally honest throughout life. Teeth form early and change little after they emerge, so they can preserve childhood signals. Bone, however, remodels. It is constantly being broken down and rebuilt by the living body. This means that adult bone chemistry may reflect the last years of life more than the first years. The skeleton is therefore not one diary, but several overlapping documents written at different times. The child's landscape may survive in the teeth, the adult's diet in the bones, the daily labour in the joints, and the crisis moments in scars or growth interruptions. Reading such evidence requires patience, because no single page contains the whole life. The climate hidden in bones is also a reminder that survival is not abstract. It happens through bodies one season at a time. A drought is not only a line on a chart, it is less milk for a child, longer walks to water, thinner animals, roots dug from harder ground, and fires kept going when cold presses close. A cold snap is not merely temperature. It is fingers stiff around a tool, infants held near skin, breath freezing in the morning, and calories burned just to remain alive. The ancient skeleton carries these pressures not as drama, but as structure. The world enters the body, and the body answers as best it can. By the time a bone is lifted from the earth, it has passed through two transformations. First, life shaped it, then burial altered it, minerals seeped in, water carried things away, pressure, microbes, soil chemistry, and time changed what remained. This is why every claim must be careful. No single explanation fully accounts for every mark, every fracture, every chemical signal. Yet the larger truth holds. Human bones are not mute relics. They are weathered instruments that once played along with climate, hunger, movement, and endurance. And when enough of them are gathered across continents and millennia, they begin to reveal a species not floating above nature, but written into it, line by line, scar by scar, until the body itself becomes a memory of the earth. The bones do not lead to a single human story at first, they lead to a crowded world. For most of the deep past, Homo sapiens are not alone on the earth, not even close. The familiar idea of one human species walking steadily toward the present is a modern illusion, created partly because only one branch remains to tell the story. 100,000 years ago, the planet holds other kinds of humans, close enough to seem like kin, different enough to unsettle every simple definition of what human means. Their bones lie in caves, river terraces, cold valleys, and high plateaus. Some are robust and heavy-browed, some are known from only a few fragments. Some are almost ghosts, recognized less by full skeletons than by traces of DNA hidden in a finger bone, a tooth, or even sediment from a cave floor. The human family is not a ladder, it is a thicket, and many of its branches are already broken by the time history begins. Neanderthals occupy much of Europe and Western Asia, living through cold cycles that would test any body. Their skeletons are powerful, with broad chests, strong limbs, large joints, and faces shaped by a long inheritance in northern landscapes. They are not the brutish caricatures of older imagination. Their brains are large, their tools are careful. They hunt dangerous animals at close range, control fire, use shelters, and survive in environments where winter can turn the world into a white and hungry machine. Their bones often show trauma, especially to the head and upper body. Injuries sometimes compared to those seen in people who work closely with large animals or face repeated physical danger. The comparison is imperfect, and scholars still debate exactly what these injury patterns mean. But the skeletons make one thing clear: Neanderthal life is not passive. It is intensely physical, skilled, and exposed. Then there are the Denisovans. Far more elusive. For years they are not known from a famous skull or a dramatic skeleton, but from a small piece of bone found in Denisova Cave in Siberia. From that fragment, genetic evidence opens a door into an entire population, or perhaps several related populations, spread across parts of Asia. Later finds add teeth, a jaw from the Tibetan plateau, and traces of ancestry in living people. It is a strange reversal of the old archaeological dream. Instead of discovering a complete skeleton, and then imagining its place in the family tree, scientists find scraps so small they might once have been overlooked, and from them recover a vanished human presence across enormous distances. The evidence remains incomplete, but the implication is astonishing. Some human relatives may have been widespread while leaving almost no recognizable bones behind. Other names hover at the edges of the story: Homo erectus, or late surviving relatives related to that broad and complicated lineage, may still persist in parts of Asia earlier in the deep background of this period. Homo floresiensis, the small-bodied human from the island of Flores, survives until relatively recent prehistoric times, though the exact relationship to other humans remains debated. Homo luzonensis, known from the Philippines, adds another island mystery. A reminder that isolated landscapes can preserve unexpected experiments in the human form. These groups are not all standing together in one place at one moment like figures arranged for a family portrait. Their timelines and territories differ, and the evidence is patchy. Still, their existence changes the emotional shape of the human past. Our ancestors moved through a world where the word human had plural meanings. The bones complicate everything because they show both difference and closeness. A Neanderthal skull is not a modern human skull. The brow ridges, the midface, the shape of the back of the cranium, the heavy body beneath it, all speak of a separate evolutionary path. Yet a Neanderthal hand can make tools. A Neanderthal child grows slowly enough to suggest a life history not entirely alien to ours. A Neanderthal body can heal after severe injury, which may imply care or at least tolerance within a group. Some graves and possible symbolic behaviours remain debated, because the record is fragmentary and easy to overread. But the older image of a creature without thought, without social depth, without culture, has not survived the evidence. The surprising detail is that the boundary between these humans is not sealed. Modern DNA reveals that many living people outside Africa carry a small percentage of Neanderthal ancestry. Some populations in Oceania and parts of Asia carry Denisovan ancestry as well. This means that when Homo sapiens expands beyond Africa, the encounter is not only competition, avoidance, or replacement. It is also contact intimate enough to leave descendants. The bones alone hinted at complexity. Genetics confirms that ancient human worlds overlapped in bodies as well as landscapes. The secret hidden inside human bones is therefore not purely ours. Some of it comes from meetings with humans who are gone. This does not mean that all groups blended smoothly into one another. Ancient contact may have been rare, tense, uneven, and separated by long periods of distance. Small bands may have met at river crossings, hunting grounds, caves, or seasonal corridors, and those meetings could have carried curiosity, fear, exchange, conflict, or mating. No single explanation fully accounts for the disappearance of other human relatives. Climate instability, low population numbers, competition for resources, disease, absorption into expanding sapiens groups, and simple bad luck may all have played roles. The fossil record does not preserve a final scene. There is no single last Neanderthal standing beneath a darkening sky. No clear moment when one world ends and another begins. There is only a thinning of traces. The shared world also changes how modern human success should be understood. If Homo sapiens survived while others vanished, it is tempting to imagine a clean superiority, as though one species arrived with the decisive advantage and the rest were doomed. But bones resist easy triumph. Neanderthals endure for hundreds of thousands of years, far longer than cities, empires, and written history combined. Denisovans adapt to high-altitude environments in ways that later help some modern humans survive thin mountain air. Island humans show that bodies can change dramatically under isolation. These are not failed drafts on the way to us. They are successful humans in their own worlds, until conditions shift beyond what their numbers, territories, or histories can absorb. So the skeleton in the ground is never only an individual. It belongs to a crowded inheritance. Its shape may be sapiens, but its story unfolds among cousins, neighbours, rivals, and vanished kin. Some leave heavy bones and recognizable skulls. Some leave only a molar, a finger, a jaw, or a genetic whisper inside living bloodlines. Together they make the 100,000-year secret stranger, and more humbling. The body that modern humans carry is not the result of solitude. It is the result of survival in a world where other humans watched the same fires, crossed the same cold, followed the same animals, and then, one by one, disappeared into the earth. If the human world is crowded with other branches, the body of Homo sapiens is not the strongest branch in any simple sense. It is not built like the Neanderthal body, with that deep chest, heavy musculature, and dense strength suited to close, punishing labour in cold lands. It is not armoured by mass. It does not carry claws, fangs, or the explosive speed of a predator. Yet the sapiens skeleton carries its own strange design, one that is less impressive at a glance and more unsettling the longer it is studied. The bones suggest a creature made for distance, balance, manipulation, and endurance. A creature that survives not by overpowering the world but by remaining in motion through it. The legs are long, the pelvis supports upright walking with a difficult elegance. The spine curves like an imperfect spring. The foot becomes a lever, absorbing shock and pushing the body forward across open ground. The hand, freed from walking, becomes an instrument of pressure, precision, violence, tenderness, and invention. This is one of the great transformations hidden inside the skeleton. Upright walking is often described as a triumph, and in many ways it is. It allows ancient humans to carry food, tools, infants, fuel, and gathered plants across long distances. It lifts the eyes above grass and scrub. It makes travel efficient enough that a group can follow shifting resources through harsh landscapes. It turns the body into something capable of persistence, of covering ground not in one dramatic burst but over hours, days, and seasons. A human is not the fastest animal on the plain, but a human can keep moving after speed has burned itself out. The exact importance of endurance hunting remains debated, and no single explanation fully accounts for the human body's design. Still, the bones show that long-distance movement is not a side note in human evolution. It is one of the main pressures written into the frame. The same design brings trouble. The upright spine pays for its freedom with pain. vertebrae stack under weight in a way that can fail, compress, twist, or wear down. Knees carry forces they did not evolve from nothing to handle perfectly. Ankles and hips become points of both grace and vulnerability. The pelvis, shaped for walking, must also allow childbirth, and here the skeleton records one of the most dangerous compromises in the human story. Large-brained infants must pass through a birth canal constrained by the demands of bipedal movement. Human babies are born helpless compared with many other mammals, their brains still unfinished, their bodies unable to cling, run, or feed themselves without constant care. This is not weakness alone, it is also strategy, though a costly one. The long childhood of humans allows learning, imitation, social bonding, and the slow absorption of skills too complex to be born fully formed. But it makes every infant a demand placed on the group. The skull reveals the cost most clearly. A large brain is expensive tissue. It consumes energy even when the body rests. It requires food, protection, long development, and social conditions stable enough for learning to matter. The head becomes the seat of planning, memory, language, tool-making, imagination, and perhaps the ability to carry absent things inside the mind, a water source beyond a ridge, a dead relative remembered by the fire, a migration route used by grandparents. An animal's habits from last season, but the skull is also fragile. A blow to the head can end a life quickly. Dental problems can become fatal when infection travels beyond the mouth. Crowded teeth, worn enamel, abscesses, and jaw changes appear again and again in ancient remains, showing that survival depends not only on grand intelligence, but on small structures that can betray the entire body. The hands are another part of the secret. Human fingers are capable of force and delicacy together. They can grip a spear shaft, twist plant fibers, scrape hide, shape stone, smooth bone, thread cordage, carry embers, crush pigment, and hold an infant's body close against cold. Tool use is older than Homo sapiens, and other human relatives are also skilled makers, so it would be false to treat tools as the exclusive miracle of one species. Yet in sapiens, the hand becomes part of a widening system: hand, eye, brain, memory, teaching, and shared practice. A stone blade is not just an object, it is a decision passed through bodies. Someone learns where the good stone is. Someone learns how hard to strike. Someone carries the tool, loses it, replaces it, improves it, or teaches a child how not to waste a rare material. The bones of the wrist and fingers cannot tell this whole story, but they belong to it. Injuries reveal the body's daily risks with a bluntness that no heroic story can soften. Ancient skeletons may show fractures from falls, accidents, hunting, conflict, or blows from animals. A broken arm can mean a failed climb, a struggle, a thrown body, or a desperate moment near prey. A healed leg injury can mean months of vulnerability. A damaged rib may preserve the memory of impact, coughing illness, or hard physical strain. The evidence remains incomplete because bone records only what affects bone, while most pain vanishes without a trace. A torn muscle, fever, grief, exhaustion, childbirth complication, or wound that kills quickly may leave little or nothing behind. What remains is therefore not the full suffering of the past, but a minimum record of what the hard tissues endured. And still, the skeleton is not merely a catalogue of damage, it is proof of recovery. A healed fracture is time made visible. It means the body survived the first shock, avoided fatal infection, found calories for repair, and continued long enough for bone to knit itself back together. In some cases, severe disability or long-term injury suggest that the person may have depended on others. Scholars still debate how often such evidence proves direct care. Because survival can occur in several ways and not every healed wound requires prolonged assistance. But there are remains so striking that they make abandonment difficult to imagine. A body that lives after major injury, tooth loss, or impaired movement hints at a social world where usefulness is not measured only by immediate strength. Knowledge, kinship, memory, and affection may have kept people alive when their bones alone would have made survival unlikely. This is where the human skeleton becomes more mysterious than a weapon or a tool. It is built for survival, but not solitary survival. Its greatest strengths often require others. The helpless infant needs arms, the injured adult needs food. The old person may need protection, but may also carry maps of seasons, plants, dangers, and stories that keep the group from repeating fatal mistakes. The large brain is not only an organ inside one skull, it is part of a network spread across many skulls. Many hands, many remembered paths. The body of Homo sapiens is therefore both independent and dependent, capable of extraordinary travel yet born in need, skilled with tools yet vulnerable to a bad tooth, designed for endurance yet haunted by pain. Across 100,000 years, that imperfect design proves enough. Not perfect, not invincible, not destined, but enough. The bones show a creature continually paying for its advantages, walking upright and suffering the spine, thinking deeply and feeding the brain, giving birth to helpless children and building social worlds around them, gripping tools and becoming dependent on what tools make possible. The secret inside the skeleton is not that humans are physically supreme. It is that the body becomes a platform for cooperation, memory, and adaptation. In a world of stronger animals and other human relatives, this lean, aching, inventive frame keeps moving, carrying fire, children, scars, and knowledge toward landscapes it has not yet learned to fear. Long before modern humans become a global species, before they leave footprints across every continent that can carry them, the deepest part of the story remains in Africa. This is not a simple birthplace scene with one valley, one tribe, one sudden awakening. It is wider, older, and more difficult to hold in the mind. Africa 100,000 years ago is not a fixed stage. It is a continent of shifting lakes, wooded savannas, deserts that expand and retreat, volcanic highlands, river corridors, coastal refuges, and grasslands that appear generous in one age and punishing in another. Human groups live within this restless geography in scattered populations, sometimes connected, sometimes isolated, sometimes thriving near water and food, sometimes pushed into narrow refuges by drought or changing climate. What survives in the record suggests not one clean origin, but a braided human story, with many groups carrying pieces of what later becomes the modern human inheritance. The bones from this long African threshold are precious because they are rare. Deep time is not generous with human remains. A body must die in the right place, be buried or protected quickly enough, avoid destruction by scavengers, water, acidity, pressure, and later disturbance, and then be found by people capable of recognizing what it is. Most bodies vanish completely. Entire populations may live, move, suffer, adapt, and disappear without leaving a single recoverable skeleton. This is why the evidence remains incomplete, and why scholars still debate the exact shape of early Homo sapiens history. The few bones that do survive are not a full census of ancient humanity. They are scattered lamps in a very large, dark room. Yet those lamps reveal something remarkable. By this time, humans with broadly modern anatomy exist across parts of Africa, though not every feature appears everywhere at once. Skulls, jaws, teeth, and limb bones show a gradual assembling of the modern human form rather than a sudden finished design. Faces become smaller and more tucked beneath the brain case compared with earlier humans. The skull becomes rounder over long spans of time, the chin, that odd modern human feature, becomes more familiar. But the process is uneven. Some fossils look close to living humans in one way and archaic in another. This mosaic pattern matters because it warns against imagining a single moment when humanity becomes fully itself. The body changes across landscapes, across populations, across thousands of generations. In Eastern Africa, lakes rise and fall with dramatic force, a shoreline that offers fish, reeds, birds, and fresh water in one century may become exposed dust in another. Volcanic ash sometimes settles over the land, later giving scientists a way to date the layers that hold tools or bones. In southern Africa, caves and rock shelters near the coast preserve traces of people using shellfish, ochre, stone tools, and fire. Along river systems and inland basins, other groups follow animals, gather plants, and work stone into points, flakes, and blades suited for many tasks. These tools are not decorations in the story, they're extensions of the body. The hand strikes the stone, the mind remembers the sequence, and the group survives by turning landscape into usable edges. A lesser-known detail is how important refugees may have been. During harsh climate phases, human populations may not have been spread evenly across the continent. They may have clustered in places where water, plants, animals, and coastal foods remained reliable while surrounding regions became more difficult. A refuge is not paradise. It is simply a place where survival remains possible when other places fail. Near coasts, shellfish can provide dependable calories when large game is uncertain. In wetlands, reeds, tubers, fish, and birds create a different kind of security. In highlands, changing temperatures and rainfall may open or close routes. No single explanation fully accounts for where ancient humans endured, but the idea of shifting refuges helps explain how scattered groups could survive repeated environmental pressure without disappearing entirely. Inside these landscapes, the skeleton grows under negotiation. A child born during a wet period may know a world of fuller rivers and more abundant animals. The same child, reaching adulthood during drought, may travel farther, eat differently, and raise children under harsher conditions. Bones and teeth may preserve parts of that instability. Growth stress, dental wear, injury, and chemical traces can reveal lives shaped by uneven resources. But the body is only one part of the archive. Stone tools, hearths, pigments, shells, animal bones, and sediments complete the wider picture. Together they suggest people who are not merely surviving by instinct, but using knowledge where to find stone, when plants ripen, how animals move, which shells can be collected, how fire behaves in damp air, and how to return to places that mattered. Ochre is one of the more haunting clues. Red and yellow iron-rich pigments appear at several Middle Stone Age sites, sometimes scraped, ground, or transported. The purpose is debated. Ochre can be practical, used in hide working, hafting adhesives, insect protection, or other tasks. It can also carry visual or symbolic meaning, colouring bodies, objects, or surfaces. Scholars still debate how often ochre proves symbolism, and caution is necessary because a red mineral is not automatically a ritual object. Still, the repeated interest in pigment hints at minds attentive not only to utility, but to appearance, marking, memory, and perhaps identity. A bone can tell us how a person moved. Ochre may hint at how a person wished to be seen. This is the period when the human secret becomes increasingly social. Survival depends not only on strong legs or clever hands, but on information moving between people. A tool-making method must be learned, a dangerous plant must be remembered, a water source must be known before thirst becomes fatal. A coastal shelf exposed by lower sea levels may offer food, but only to people who understand tides. Fire must be maintained, shared, or remade, children must be taught slowly. Because human knowledge is too large for one mind to invent alone in every generation. The large brain inside the skull becomes powerful not because it is isolated, but because it belongs to a group. But the African threshold also contains danger. Scattered populations can lose contact. A drought can shrink the range of a group until marriage partners are few. Food is unreliable, and every death matters. A disease outbreak in a small band can erase a lineage. A failed season can turn a familiar homeland into a trap. The human species does not stand above extinction here. It passes through narrow places, though how narrow remains debated. Genetic studies suggest ancient population structure, separations, mixtures, and periods of reduced numbers. But translating DNA into exact lived events is difficult. Bones give individuals, genes give patterns, landscapes give pressures. The full story lives somewhere between them. So Africa at around 100,000 years ago is not merely the starting point of a journey outward. It is the furnace in which many versions of human possibility are tested. Some groups vanish without leaving descendants. Some contribute only faint traces. Some carry forward bodies, tools, habits, and ways of learning that will later travel beyond the continent. The secret hidden inside human bones is already becoming larger than anatomy. It is becoming a story of scattered communities enduring unstable worlds, keeping enough children alive, preserving enough knowledge, and moving when the land itself changes its mind. Before the great migrations, before the meetings with Neanderthals and Denisovans, before the Ice Age corridors and distant islands, there is this long African threshold, not a single gate, but a vast and shifting homeland where humanity nearly disappears into silence many times, and does not. The land does not change all at once. It changes first in small betrayals. A lake pulls back from its old shore and leaves cracked mud where birds once gathered. A river that elders remember as dependable begins to fail at the end of the dry season. Grass grows thinner across a familiar plain. Animals arrive later, or not at all. A grove that once offered shade and fruit becomes a cluster of dead branches, grey against a hard sky, to the people living through it. Climate is not an abstract force. It is the taste of dust in the mouth, the weight of a child carried farther than before, the silence of a hunting ground that used to be alive. The bones record these changes slowly, through hunger, movement, injury, and survival. But the world itself is always moving first. Across the last 100,000 years, climate behaves like a restless engine. Glaciers grow and shrink, sea levels fall and rise, deserts widen, then retreat, rain belts shift north and south. Forests open into grasslands dry into scrub, and corridors of life appear for a while before closing again. Human groups do not face one ice age as a single frozen wall. They face pulses, intervals, reversals, and regional surprises. Some places become harsher while others become temporarily generous. A route that is impossible in one generation may open in another. A green corridor through what is now desert may allow people and animals to pass, only to vanish later beneath sand and heat. Scholars still debate the timing and importance of many of these windows, but the pattern is clear enough. Climate repeatedly redraws the map of human possibility. In Africa, this means that landscapes sometimes connect and sometimes divide. The Sahara, often imagined as an eternal emptiness, has not always been the same desert. At certain times, stronger monsoon systems push rain farther north, feeding lakes, rivers, wetlands, and grasslands across regions that later become dry. At other times, aridity returns, and the same broad spaces become barriers. These changes matter deeply for human movement. A wet Sahara can become a bridge. A dry Sahara can become a wall. Neither condition lasts forever. People living along its edges may experience the land not as a permanent desert, but as a breathing frontier, opening and closing on scales larger than any one life. The same pattern appears beyond Africa, in the Levant, that narrow hinge between Africa and Eurasia. Climate can turn valleys, coasts, and uplands into corridors or traps. When conditions are favourable, animals move through, and human groups may follow. When cold or drought tightens, those same routes become more difficult, and populations may retreat, fragment, or disappear from the archaeological record. This region becomes one of the great testing grounds of human expansion, not because it offers an easy highway, but because it shifts between invitation and refusal. The evidence remains incomplete, and every site represents only a fragment of a much larger movement. Yet the bones and tools suggest that early modern humans reached beyond Africa more than once, with some expansions leaving little or no lasting trace. Sea level adds another hidden force. During colder periods, more water is locked in ice, and coastlines move outward. Land appears where shallow seas exist today. Coastal plains widen. Islands may become easier to reach. Rivers cut farther across exposed shelves before meeting the sea. These lost coastlines may have held food-rich habitats, camps, shell middens, and migration routes now drowned beneath water. This is one of the great silences in the record. If ancient humans often lived along coasts, much of their evidence may now lie underwater, broken, buried, or erased. What survives inland may therefore give an incomplete view of a life partly lived at the edge of the sea. No single explanation fully accounts for the gaps, but submerged landscapes remind us that absence is not always proof that people were absent. Cold reshapes bodies and behaviour in different ways. In Eurasia, glacial cycles can make vast regions more open, dry, and severe. The world of mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, reindeer, horses, and steppe grasses is not simply a frozen wasteland. It can be productive, but it demands skill. Fuel may be scarce. Shelter matters. Clothing becomes more than comfort. It becomes survival. Fire becomes a centre of human life, not only for warmth, but for cooking, protection, tool-making, and gathering people into a social space when darkness grows long. Bones from colder worlds may show heavy physical activity, nutritional stress, and injury, but they also point toward adaptation. People learn to live where an unprepared body would fail quickly. Drought may be even more dangerous than cold because it can turn knowledge against itself. A group may know every water source in a region, every edible route, every migration path of animals, and still find that the old knowledge no longer works. Springs fail. Herds shift beyond reach. Plants flower at the wrong time or not at all. In such moments, survival depends on flexibility moving farther, widening the diet, forming alliances, splitting into smaller groups, or following uncertain routes into unfamiliar lands. The skeleton may later show stress, but the lived crisis is social as much as physical. Who shares food, who decides when to leave, who remembers another valley, who is too weak to travel. A surprising detail in this story is that climate pressure does not always produce immediate movement. Sometimes it produces staying. A refuge can become more important when the surrounding world worsens. People may cluster near lakes, caves, coasts, wetlands, or river systems, not because they are expanding confidently, but because options have narrowed. These refugees can preserve cultural habits for long periods, allowing tool traditions, exchange networks, and local knowledge to deepen. But refuges can also become crowded, vulnerable, and dangerous if conditions continue to decline. What looks in the archaeological record like stability may sometimes be resilience, and sometimes desperation. The body carries these pressures forward. A child born in a refuge may inherit not only genes, but a local map of survival: which shellfish are safe, which stones fracture well, which animals pass after rain, which plants can be dug when the surface looks barren. A person born during a wetter interval may grow up with roots that later close before their children reach adulthood. The climate does not merely surround human history, it edits it. It removes some choices, exaggerates others, and forces small bands to make decisions with consequences that can echo for thousands of years. And yet, climate alone does not explain everything. Many species face the same shifts and vanish. Some human relatives endure cold better than Homo sapiens and still disappear. Some populations survive harsh regions while others fail in milder ones. Scholars still debate how environment interacts with technology, population size, social networks, and chance. The weather breaks the world repeatedly, but it does not decide the story by itself. It creates the crisis: human bodies, tools, relationships, and memories determine what can be done inside that crisis. So the secret in the bones deepens. They are not only records of hunger or cold, they are records of decisions forced by changing skies. Every thickened leg bone may belong to a longer route. Every stress mark in a tooth may belong to a failed season. Every chemical trace may point to a childhood spent in one landscape and an adulthood in another. The earth changes, and the human skeleton answers, imperfectly, painfully, sometimes brilliantly, across the 100,000 years. Weather does not simply happen above human beings. It enters their bones, redirects their paths, and turns survival into a moving target. When the climate tightens and landscapes fragment, the human story narrows. It does not narrow everywhere at once, and it does not leave behind a clean line that can be followed like a path on a map. It narrows in scattered places, in small bands, in empty camps not returned to, in children never born, in groups that carry their knowledge to the edge of a drying lake and find no way forward. Later, the evidence appears not as a single catastrophe, but as a pattern of absence and survival. Tools become rare in some regions, bones vanish from the record. Genetic traces in living people suggest that ancient populations were sometimes reduced, separated, and reshaped by pressures severe enough to leave marks across thousands of generations. This is the bottleneck hidden inside the human body: not one doorway, not one night of disaster, but a series of constrictions through which only some lineages pass. A population bottleneck is a simple idea with unsettling consequences. When a group becomes very small, whether because of climate, disease, isolation, famine, violence, or repeated bad luck, only a fraction of its genetic diversity continues into the future. The descendants of survivors may multiply later, spreading across continents, but they do not recover all that was lost. The missing lineages remain missing. The vanished variations do not announce themselves. They are simply absent from the living world. This means that every modern human body carries not only inheritance, but also erasure. What survives in our bones and genes is the result of countless ancestors who lived long enough to reproduce, while other human possibilities ended quietly. For many years, the idea of a severe bottleneck in early Homo sapiens history captured public imagination because it offered a dramatic explanation for why modern humans are genetically similar compared with some other species. Some versions linked this narrowing to enormous volcanic eruptions, especially the Toba eruption roughly 74,000 years ago, imagining a near-extinction event in which humanity was reduced to a tiny remnant. The story is powerful, almost cinematic. Ash in the sky, cold years, starving bands, the species clinging to survival by a thread. But the evidence remains incomplete, and many scholars now treat the most extreme versions of that scenario with caution. Toba was a vast eruption, and it surely affected environments. But archaeological evidence from several regions does not show a simple global human collapse immediately afterward. No single explanation fully accounts for the genetic patterns we see. The deeper reality is more complicated and, in some ways, more haunting. Human populations may have been structured into many small groups across Africa and beyond, separated and reconnected over long periods, instead of one sudden crash followed by one recovery. There may have been repeated local contractions, expansions, extinctions, and mixtures. A group disappears in one valley, another survives along a coast. A population isolated for thousands of years later reconnects with others, bringing back genes, tools, or habits that might otherwise have vanished. The skeletons found by archaeologists are too few to show all of this directly. Genetics sees broad shadows. Bones give individual lives. The space between them is where the mystery lives. The bones themselves can show what bottlenecks feel like at the level of the body. A reduced population is not an abstract number when food fails. It is fewer adults able to hunt, gather, carry children, defend a camp, remember distant water, and care for the sick. It is a smaller pool of mates, a greater risk that one accident removes a skilled toolmaker or one fever takes an elder who knew when the antelope moved. A skeleton with growth stress may represent a child who survived hunger, but around that child may be many others who did not. A healed fracture may show care, but care becomes harder when everyone is exhausted. The record preserves the survivors more often than the lost, and this can make ancient life appear more successful than it felt to those living through it. One surprising detail is that small groups can preserve knowledge brilliantly, but they can also lose it. Technology is not a permanent possession once invented. It must be taught, practiced, remembered, and useful enough to keep alive. If a population shrinks too far, or if skilled individuals die without passing on techniques, complex behaviors can simplify. This does not mean ancient people became less intelligent. It means culture depends on networks, a bone tool, a stone technique, a method of making adhesive, a way of sewing hides, or knowledge of seasonal roots can disappear if the social chain breaks. In the deep past, a bottleneck could therefore narrow not only bloodlines, but memory. Yet smallness can also make humans flexible. A band of 30 people can move more quickly than a crowded settlement. They can change camps, alter diet, split temporarily, reunite later, and carry their world on their backs. The skeleton adapts to this mobility. Feet harden, legs strengthen, shoulders bear loads. Children learn by watching because formal instruction does not exist as a separate institution. It is woven into daily survival. The group becomes both fragile and resilient. Like an ember carried through wind, too much pressure, and it goes out, enough protection, and it can ignite a new fire far away. The genetic record suggests that some ancient divisions within Africa were deep, with populations separated for long spans before later mixing. This matters because it changes the meaning of survival. Humanity may not have emerged from one tiny heroic band alone, but from a shifting web of populations that endured in different places and later contributed unevenly to the future. Some branches gave much, some gave little, some may have vanished entirely before leaving any trace in living genomes. Scholars still debate the scale, timing, and location of these ancient population changes, but the broad lesson is clear: our species survives not as a single unbroken march, but as a set of lines repeatedly thinning and rejoining. Bones add a moral weight that numbers lack. A genetic bottleneck can sound clean when described in percentages, but the skeleton brings it back to hunger, illness, childbirth, cold nights, and uncertain movement. It asks us to imagine a world where every child matters because there are so few, where every death changes the balance of knowledge, labour, and kinship, where survival is measured not in empires or victories, but in whether the next generation opens its eyes. The secret hidden in human bones is partly the memory of these narrow passages. We are not descended from everyone who once lived. We are descended from those whose bodies carried life through the narrowing, and from those who helped them do it. This is why the bottleneck is not only a genetic event, it is a human condition. Again and again, the ancient world reduces the margin for error. Climate shifts, populations scatter, roots close, and other human relatives face their own pressures. Some vanish, some merge, some leave only fragments behind. Homo sapiens continues, not because every group succeeds, but because enough groups survive in enough places, holding enough memory to begin again when the world opens. Inside the modern skeleton, beneath its aches and inherited compromises, there is still the shape of that passage, a species squeezed by time, thinned by danger, and carried forward through bodies that were never guaranteed to last. When the narrow passages widen again, human bodies begin to appear in new places, and the skeleton starts to change under unfamiliar skies. Migration is often imagined as a bold arrow drawn across a map, clean and confident, moving from homeland to destination, as if people know where history wants them to go. The bones suggest something less tidy and far more human. Movement happens in pulses. A group follows animals through a green corridor and stops where water holds. Another edges along a coast, returning again and again to shellfish beds and river mouths. Some move into a valley and remain for generations. Others vanish from the record after a short occupation, leaving tools behind like a sentence interrupted. Each journey places the body under new conditions, and over many generations those conditions begin to leave marks on stature, limb proportion, skull shape, teeth, diet, and disease. The first great migrations out of Africa do not produce one instant conquest of the world. Early modern humans reach parts of the Near East long before the final major expansions that give rise to later non-African populations. But some of those early movements may fail to leave many descendants. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate how many waves left Africa, which routes mattered most, and why some groups endured while others disappeared. Still, the larger picture is clear as climates open corridors and close them again. Homo sapiens begins to live beyond the landscapes that shaped its earliest history. The body must now answer new pressures, not in one lifetime, but through the slow sorting of survival across many births and deaths. Cold is one of the most obvious pressures, but it is not simple. A person born in a cold land can wear skins, use fire, build shelter, sleep close to others, and choose camps protected from wind. Culture buffers biology, yet biology still matters. Across long timescales, human populations in colder environments often tend toward more compact body proportions, because a body with less surface area relative to volume loses heat more slowly in warmer environments. Longer limbs can help release heat more efficiently. These patterns are broad and imperfect, and no single skeleton should be forced to carry too much meaning. But when many bodies are compared across time and place, climate seems to press gently but persistently on human form, shaping not a destiny, but a tendency. Sunlight leaves a different record, one visible not only in bones but in the living skin of descendants. As humans move into regions with weaker ultraviolet radiation, especially farther from the equator, skin pigmentation changes over long periods in ways tied partly to vitamin D production. In regions with intense sunlight, darker pigmentation helps protect against ultraviolet damage and the breakdown of folate, important for reproduction and development. This is not a story of simple ranking or fixed categories. It is a story of bodies adapting to different balances of risk. The skeleton itself can preserve the consequence. When vitamin D is too low, bones may soften or deform, especially in children. Rickets is more familiar from later historical populations, but the underlying vulnerability is ancient. A body needs sunlight, but not too much. Migration changes the equation. Diet changes the skeleton as well. A population moving into a new environment must learn new foods or fail. Coastal groups may rely more heavily on fish, shellfish, seabirds, and marine mammals. Inland groups may follow herds, gather nuts, dig tubers, process seeds, or hunt smaller animals when large prey is scarce. Teeth become witnesses to these choices. Hard foods wear enamel. Grit from grinding stones can abrade teeth. Heavy chewing shapes jaws and muscle attachments. Chemical signals in bone can hint at marine protein, plant patterns, or animal-heavy diets. What survives in the record suggests that successful migrants are rarely narrow specialists for long. They learn landscapes through the stomach, and the skeleton quietly records the lesson. Long-distance movement itself alters bodies. The legs of mobile hunter-gatherers often show strength that reflects repeated travel over uneven ground. Feet adapt to use in ways modern footwear can hide or weaken. Carrying children, tools, fuel, water, and food places demands on the spine, shoulders, and hips. This physical life does not mean every ancient person was constantly marching. Seasonal rhythms may include periods of rest, repair, and local abundance. But the body is generally closer to the ground and weather than most modern bodies are. It climbs, squats, kneels, lifts, runs, walks, digs, and sleeps on surfaces that do not forgive softness. The bones become records of movement not as adventure, but as daily necessity. A surprising detail is that migration can make humans more fragile before it makes them more adapted. Entering a new land means encountering unfamiliar pathogens, plants that look edible but are dangerous, animals whose habits are not yet known, stones that fracture differently, seasons that arrive out of rhythm with memory, and winters or dry periods that local experience has not prepared the group to survive. A people can carry extraordinary knowledge and still find that some of it stops working beyond a mountain range or desert edge. In such moments, the body pays for uncertainty. More injuries, nutritional stress, failed births, and childhood illness may follow. Scholars still debate how visible these short-term crises are in the fossil record, because many failed movements leave few bones behind. But the risk must have been real. Migration also reshapes faces in subtle ways. Skull form is influenced by inheritance, climate, diet, growth, and chance. Cold, dry air may affect nasal shape over long spans, with narrower nasal passages often discussed as one adaptation that helps warm and humidify air before it reaches the lungs. But skulls are complicated, and old attempts to divide humanity into rigid types have left a legacy of error and misuse. Modern science treats variation more carefully. Human differences are real. But they are gradients, histories, and local adaptations, not fixed walls. The face is not a label. It is a landscape of ancestry, growth, environment, and time. As humans move farther, the old African inheritance does not disappear. It travels inside every body. The long legs, sweating skin, endurance capacity, social dependency, tool-making hands, and hungry brain remain. But each new region adds pressure. The Arctic edge demands clothing, shelter, and fat-rich foods. Tropical forests demand knowledge of dense ecological webs. High altitudes challenge oxygen use. Open steppe rewards mobility and cooperative hunting. Islands force bodies and cultures into limits set by shoreline, storms, and available prey. In every place, The skeleton becomes less a universal human object and more a local negotiation. This is why the story of migration is not just expansion, it is transformation under risk. The body carries the past into a place where the past is no longer enough. It must learn, adjust, and sometimes change over generations. Some groups succeed by innovation, some by interbreeding with other human populations, some by finding refuges, some by moving again before conditions turn fatal. Others likely fail without leaving names, stories, or descendants. The bones that survive are therefore not souvenirs of conquest. They are the remains of experiments in belonging. Across the 100,000-year secret, faces and bodies become archives of movement. A skull in one region may preserve ancestry from far away. A tooth may reveal childhood in a different geological landscape than the place of burial. A limb bone may thicken under the demands of terrain. A jaw may change as food changes. Every migrant body is both memory and question. Where did this person come from? What did they learn? What did the land demand? And what was lost along the way? The map of humanity is not drawn only on stone tools or cave walls. It is drawn in cheekbones, teeth, limbs, joints, and the quiet chemistry of bone. By the time modern humans move deeper into Eurasia, the shadows beside the fire are no longer only their own. In caves, river valleys, limestone shelters, forest edges, and cold, open plains, another human presence has already been living for an immense span of time. Neanderthals are not newcomers to these lands. They know the winters, the animals, the stone sources, the caves that hold warmth, the slopes where herds pass, and the hard mathematics of survival in climates that can turn generous ground into frozen distance. Their bones are older in these regions than the bones of Homo sapiens. Their tools lie in layers beneath and beside later human traces. For a while, the two human worlds overlap, and the skeleton becomes one of the few witnesses to that meeting. The Neanderthal body carries a different history of adaptation. It is broad, strong, and compact, with thick limb bones, powerful joints, and a trunk built like a furnace against cold. The face projects forward, the nose is large, the brow heavy, the skull long and low compared with the rounder skull of modern humans. These differences once encouraged people to imagine Neanderthals as crude or failed, but the bones have gradually corrected that mistake. A powerful skeleton is not a primitive skeleton. It is a body shaped by hundreds of thousands of years in demanding landscapes. It speaks of close-range hunting, heavy work, repeated strain, and lives spent in direct contact with stone, hide, wood, fire, weather, and animals large enough to kill. The injuries are striking. Many Neanderthal skeletons show fractures, trauma, worn joints, and signs of physically dangerous lives. Some injuries heal, meaning the person survives after damage that could easily have ended them. A broken arm, a damaged rib, a blow to the head, a bad hip, a missing tooth. Each one suggests pain endured in a world without surgery, without antibiotics, without any cushion except skill, care, and luck. Scholars still debate exactly what the injury patterns reveal. Some may come from hunting large prey at close range. Some may reflect falls, accidents in rugged terrain, conflict, or the ordinary brutality of a life where nearly every task is physical. But the larger truth is difficult to miss. Neanderthal survival is not clumsy. It is disciplined, intimate, and costly. Their tools deepen the picture. Neanderthals shape stone with planning and precision. They make points, scrapers, and flakes suited for cutting meat, working hides, shaping wood, and processing the materials of daily life. They use fire. They occupy caves and open-air sites. They hunt large animals, sometimes in ways that require cooperation and knowledge of terrain. Evidence suggests they may use pigments, collect unusual objects. and perhaps create marks or arrangements that hint at symbolic thought, though the interpretation of some finds remains disputed. What survives in the record suggests minds fully engaged with their world, even if their culture does not always look like the later explosion of ornaments, images, and long-distance exchange associated with some Homo sapiens groups. When modern humans and Neanderthals encounter one another, the meeting is not a single event. It is likely a long series of contacts spread across thousands of years and many places. Some groups may never meet. Some may see only traces smoke beyond a valley, footprints in mud, a recently abandoned camp, bones cracked by unfamiliar hands. Others may come close enough to exchange genes. The proof is carried in living people today. Many humans outside Africa inherit a small portion of Neanderthal DNA, evidence that at least some encounters led to children whose descendants survived. This is one of the most intimate secrets hidden inside the human body. Part of the vanished Neanderthal world continues not as bones in a cave, but as fragments in modern genomes. This does not make the relationship simple or peaceful. Interbreeding can happen in many kinds of contact, from alliance to absorption to coercion, and the genetic record cannot tell us the emotional texture of those meetings. There may have been curiosity, avoidance, hostility, cooperation, mating, competition, imitation, and misunderstanding, all at different times and places. A small band of Homo sapiens entering a Neanderthal landscape would not be entering empty land. They would be entering someone else's hunting grounds, someone else's seasonal routes, someone else's known world. The pressure would not only be biological, it would be social and ecological, a question of who finds food, who controls shelter, who knows the land better, and who can survive when conditions worsen. For a while, Neanderthals and modern humans may even share or exchange techniques. Archaeologists debate how certain tool traditions spread and whether some late Neanderthal material culture reflects independent invention, influence from Homo sapiens, or a mixture of both. The evidence remains incomplete because artifacts do not carry labels naming the maker, and layers in caves can be disturbed, compressed, or difficult to date precisely. Still, the late Neanderthal world does not look like a culture simply waiting to disappear. It looks dynamic, regional, and under pressure. There are signs of adaptation, not surrender. Then, slowly in archaeological terms but perhaps unevenly in lived experience, Neanderthal traces thin. By around 40,000 years ago, they are disappearing from most of their known range. The reasons remain debated, and no single explanation fully accounts for this ending. Climate instability may have fragmented habitats and reduced prey. Small population sizes may have made Neanderthal groups vulnerable to bad seasons, low birth rates, inbreeding, or local extinction. Competition with expanding Homo sapiens may have increased pressure on resources. Disease may have travelled between populations. Some Neanderthal groups may have been absorbed into modern human communities through interbreeding, while others died out in isolation. Extinction, in this case, may not have been a dramatic replacement in one stroke, but the cumulative effect of many small losses. The tragedy is that Neanderthals had already survived so much. They endure glacial cycles, brutal winters, dangerous hunts, and shifting environments for longer than modern civilization has existed by an almost absurd margin. If survival were awarded simply for toughness, they would have remained. But toughness is not always enough. A species can be strong and still vulnerable if its populations are small, scattered, and pressed by rapid change. A body superbly suited to one world can struggle when that world fractures. A culture rich in local knowledge can suffer when old territories no longer provide enough food, or when newcomers alter the balance. The bones show strength. The silence after them shows how strength can fail. For Homo sapiens, the Neanderthal encounter becomes part of the hidden inheritance. Some Neanderthal genetic variants influence immune responses, skin, hair, metabolism, and other traits in living people, though the effects are complex and often small. These fragments are not relics in a museum case. They are working pieces of biology, some once useful, some neutral, some possibly harmful in modern environments. The vanished branch is gone as a people, but not entirely gone as an influence. It lingers inside bodies that do not look Neanderthal, inside immune reactions, inherited risks, and adaptations carried unknowingly across millennia. So the skeletons in Eurasian caves are not merely evidence of replacement, they are evidence of proximity, tension, kinship, and loss. A Neanderthal thigh bone with thick walls, a healed injury in an ancient rib, a modern human skull from a nearby layer, a tool edge dulled by use, a fragment of DNA in a living person all belong to the same deep entanglement. The secret hidden inside human bones grows darker here, because survival is shown beside disappearance. One kind of human continues, another fades, and between them there is not a clean boundary, but a shadowed overlap where the dead leave traces inside the living. The Denisovans enter the story almost like a mistake the Earth nearly kept for itself. There is no famous skull staring from a museum case, no nearly complete skeleton arranged with the solemn authority of a known ancestor. For a long time, there is only a small fragment of bone from a Siberian cave, so plain that its importance could easily have passed unnoticed. Yet inside that fragment is genetic evidence powerful enough to reveal an entire vanished human population. It is one of the strangest turns in the study of the human past, a people first recognized not by the shape of their face or the strength of their limbs, but by the molecular whisper left inside a broken piece of a child's body. The skeleton, in this case, is barely there, and still it opens a world. Denisova Cave sits in the Altai Mountains, a place of cold air, stone chambers, animal movement, and long human occupation. Across time, it shelters different kinds of humans, including Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans. The cave becomes less a home of one people than a crossroads of deep time, layered with tools, bones, sediments, ash, and the debris of repeated returns. In such a place, the boundaries between human groups feel less like walls and more like overlapping shadows. A person enters, makes a fire, works stone, eats, leaves traces, and disappears. Another kind of human comes later, or perhaps not much later at all. Sediment builds, bones break. DNA survives in tiny fragments. Tens of thousands of years pass before anyone realizes that one of the most important clues in the cave is not visually impressive, but genetically extraordinary. The first Denisovan remains are humbling in their smallness, a finger bone, teeth, and later other fragments do not give the full body easily. They do not allow scientists to reconstruct the entire face with the confidence that a skull might provide. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate what Denisovans look like across their wide range. Some teeth are large, hinting at robust features, a jawbone from the Tibetan plateau. Linked to Denisovan ancestry through ancient protein evidence, suggest that at least some Denisovan-related people lived in high-altitude environments long before later modern populations flourished there. But the full skeleton remains elusive. The Denisovans are present and absent at once, a human group large enough to shape the ancestry of living people, yet physically known from scattered remains. Their true range may have been enormous. Genetic traces in modern populations suggest Denisovan-related ancestry across parts of Asia, island Southeast Asia, New Guinea, Australia, and Oceania. Though the story is not a simple single mixture, there may have been more than one Denisovan-related population, deeply separated from one another, meeting modern humans at different times and places. Some living groups carry far more Denisovan ancestry than others, especially in parts of Oceania. This means the Denisovan world was likely not confined to a Siberian cave. The cave gave them a name, but not necessarily their centre. It may have been only one northern edge of a much broader human landscape. The most surprising Denisovan legacy may be altitude. In some Tibetan populations, a genetic variant associated with adaptation to low oxygen at high elevations appears to have come from Denisovan-related ancestry. This does not mean Denisovans were mystical mountain people, or that every Denisovan lived among the clouds. It means that contact with an archaic human population contributed a biological tool that later helped modern humans survive, where the air is thin and ordinary bodies struggle. The clue is small, but the implication is vast. A vanished human lineage may have given later people a way to breathe more efficiently on the roof of the world. In the long record of bones and blood, survival sometimes arrives as an inheritance from those who disappear. And yet, because Denisovan bones are so rare, much remains uncertain. Their tools are difficult to identify with confidence, because stone artifacts do not preserve DNA, and similar techniques can be used by different human groups. In a cave occupied by Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans across different periods, assigning every object to a maker becomes dangerous unless the dating and context are very strong. What survives in the record suggests that Denisovans were not a minor footnote, but the details of their daily life are still shadowed. How did they hunt? How did they organize their groups? What did they wear in cold regions? How did their cultures differ from Neanderthals or Homo sapiens? The bones do not yet answer fully. One extraordinary discovery sharpens the sense of overlap: the remains of a girl whose ancestry shows both Neanderthal and Denisovan parentage. She is not a symbol or a mythic hybrid, but a real child from a real population world where different human groups met closely enough to have children. Her existence proves that contact among archaic humans was not merely theoretical. It happened in bodies. It happened in families, however those families were understood. It also reveals that the deep past was not neatly divided into separate species marching along separate roads. Human groups met, mixed, separated, and met again. The tree of humanity begins to look less like a tree and more like braided river channels, joining and splitting across a changing plain. The Denisovan story also warns against trusting the fossil record too easily. If DNA had not survived in that small bone, Denisovans might have remained almost invisible. Their ancestry in living people might have appeared as a strange signal without a face. Their physical remains might have been misclassified, ignored, or left in drawers. This raises an unsettling possibility: how many other human populations existed, but left no DNA we have found, no bones we recognize, no name at all. Deep time may contain more vanished humans than the current record can show. No single explanation fully accounts for the gaps. Preservation is uneven, excavation is uneven, scientific attention is uneven. The Earth does not archive fairly. In the skeleton, Denisovans deepen the central secret because they make absence active. A missing skull can still have descendants. A lost population can still shape immune systems, altitude adaptation, and the genetic landscape of living people. A cave fragment can overturn a century of assumptions. Human bones are no longer only about visible anatomy. They become doors into ancestry too faint for the eye, but not for molecules. The old method of comparing shapes still matters, but it is joined by a more intimate record hidden inside the tissue itself. So the Denisovans remain both clue and mystery. They are not as physically familiar as Neanderthals, not as richly represented in skeletons, not yet surrounded by the same detailed imagery of daily life, but their importance is undeniable. They prove that the human past contains branches known almost entirely through traces. They show that modern humans did not simply replace a world of others. They absorbed pieces of it, carried them onward, and forgot the encounter until science found the evidence inside bone. In that sense, the Denisovans are not gone in the ordinary way. Their camps are gone, their faces are mostly unknown, their languages are beyond recovery, but part of their survival moved silently into us. The 100,000-year secret is not only written in the bones we dig up, it is written in the living body, where vanished humans still leave instructions for breathing, enduring, and belonging to landscapes they once knew. Fire does not make the human body invincible, it only changes the terms of its fragility. Before fire, cold is a direct assault, meat is harder to digest, darkness belongs more confidently to predators, and many plants remain difficult or dangerous to eat. With fire, the night gathers around a center. Meat softens. Tubers become safer. Bones crack more easily for marrow. Smoke keeps insects away, at least imperfectly. Wet skins can dry. Stone can be heated. Wood can be hardened. And people can sit together after sunset inside a small circle of light that feels, for a few hours, like control. Yet the body remains breakable. A flame can warm hands, but it cannot stop hunger if the herds fail. It can frighten animals, but it cannot heal every wound. It can extend the day, but it also demands fuel, attention, and knowledge. Fire is not a miracle outside the human story. It is a relationship, and like every relationship in deep time, it must be maintained. The skeleton feels this change indirectly. Cooking may have helped make more energy available from food, especially tough plants and meat, easing some demands on chewing and digestion over long evolutionary spans. Human jaws and teeth become smaller than those of many earlier relatives, though this change has many causes and must be treated carefully. No single explanation fully accounts for the human face. Still, cooked food matters because it shifts survival from raw strength toward preparation. A body no longer depends only on what teeth and gut can process directly. It depends on technique collecting fuel, preserving embers, controlling heat, knowing which foods improve with cooking and which remain poisonous, teaching children not to destroy the very fire that keeps them alive. In this way, technology enters the body not as metal or machine, but as a daily habit that changes what the body must be. Stone tools do something similar. A sharp flake is a small object, but it alters anatomy's limits. Teeth do not need to tear everything. Fingernails do not need to scrape hides alone. Bare hands do not need to break bone unaided. A blade edge can open carcasses, cut tendons, shape wood, slice plants, and make other tools possible. The skeleton still works hard, but the work is reorganized. Shoulders, wrists, fingers, and back become part of a technological chain. A person does not simply grip stone, the person grips an inherited method. Someone before them learned how to strike the core, how to choose the angle, how to read the hidden fracture inside rock. What survives in the record suggests that such knowledge travelled through observation and repetition, carried by bodies long before it was carried by writing. This is where technology becomes both strength and dependency. A human with tools can enter landscapes that would otherwise reject the naked body. Clothing made from hides can turn a cold evening survivable. Containers can carry water or food. Spears can extend the reach of the arm. Cordage, one of the most important inventions and one of the least often preserved, can bind points to shafts, make nets, traps, bags, and shelters. The evidence for early fibers is often fragile because plant materials decay quickly, leaving only rare impressions or indirect clues. Yet without string, much of human life becomes harder to imagine. A spear point must be attached, a bundle must be tied, a shelter must be secured. A child can be carried more safely with slings or wraps. Some of the most powerful technologies in prehistory may have vanished almost completely because they were made from the soft things time loves to erase. Fire and tools also change the risks humans face. A sharpened point can kill prey, but it can also wound the maker. Smoke can preserve life while damaging lungs. A campfire can protect a group, or burn a shelter, or betray a location. Stone dust, repetitive work, burns, cuts, falls during hunts, and injuries from close contact with animals become part of the technological bargain. Bones may show healed fractures and strain, but they rarely preserve the burned finger, the infected cut that never reached bone, the eye irritated by smoke, or the child who breathed too much ash in a closed shelter. The evidence remains incomplete because the softest suffering disappears first. A lesser-known detail is that fire may have changed social time as much as diet. Daylight sets one rhythm, fire creates another. After sunset, people can gather, repair tools, process hides, cook slowly, watch children, share knowledge, and perhaps tell the kinds of remembered things that help groups survive beyond one season. Language leaves no fossil, and scholars still debate how far back complex speech in its modern form can be traced. But the firelit camp offers a setting where memory can become communal. A warning about a dangerous valley, a technique for finding water, a story about animal behavior, or the location of good stone can be repeated when bodies are no longer walking. The flame does not invent human thought, but it gives thought a place to linger. At the same time, technology reduces some physical pressures while increasing others. A spear allows distance from prey, but hunting still demands courage, planning, and risk. Clothing protects against cold, but requires labor, scraping hides, softening them, piercing, binding, repairing. Cooking improves food, but requires fuel, which must be gathered, carried, dried, guarded. A shelter blocks wind, but must be built in the right place and abandoned when resources shift. The human skeleton becomes less a tool by itself and more the operator of tools. This may make the body appear weaker in some respects over long spans, but weakness is the wrong word. The body is becoming integrated with culture. Its survival is no longer stored only in bone density or jaw strength. It is stored in learned behavior. This integration helps explain why fragile humans can travel so far. A bare human body entering cold steppe is poorly equipped. A human group with fire, tailored coverings, cutting tools, carried food, shared memory, and knowledge of animal movement becomes something else entirely. The species survives by building temporary worlds around its vulnerabilities. A camp is not a city, but it is already an artificial environment. Warmth arranged against cold, light arranged against darkness, sharp edges arranged against hunger, social attention arranged against helplessness. The bones of the people inside that camp still ache, break, grow, and heal, but they do so within a web of inventions. And yet the web can break. If a group loses fire in wet weather, if fuel becomes scarce, if toolstone cannot be found, if skilled makers die, if children are not taught, survival narrows quickly. Technology is often described as progress, but in deep time it is also obligation. Every advantage must be reproduced. Every skill must cross the dangerous bridge from one generation to the next. The secret hidden inside human bones is therefore not only that our ancestors made tools, it is that their bodies became dependent on knowledge outside the body. Fire, stone, hide, fibre, memory, and teaching formed a second skeleton around the first, invisible in most graves but essential to every life that reached them. At some point in the long human story, a body is not simply left where death finds it. This does not happen everywhere, and it does not happen in the same way each time. The evidence remains incomplete, because burial is fragile evidence, easily disturbed by animals, erosion, later people, and the slow pressure of earth. Yet again and again, across deep time, human bones appear in positions that suggest intention. A body placed in a hollow, a child protected by sediment, a skull arranged with care, red pigment near remains, grave-like pits that seem too deliberate to dismiss. The dead begin to occupy space in a way that hints at memory, and memory changes the meaning of the skeleton. The bones no longer speak only of diet, movement, injury, and climate. They begin to speak of the living who remained. Deliberate burial is one of the most powerful and difficult clues in archaeology. It seems, at first, straightforward. A body lies in a pit, covered by soil, perhaps with tools, pigment, animal bones, or ornaments nearby, but deep time rarely offers simple certainty. A natural hollow can look like a grave. Sediment can shift. Carnivores can move bones. Later burrowing animals can disturb the arrangement. Objects near a skeleton may have been placed there intentionally, or may simply belong to the same occupation layer. Scholars still debate some of the earliest possible burials because intention is hard to prove after tens of thousands of years. Still, there are cases where the evidence strongly suggests that the dead were treated differently from ordinary refuse or abandoned remains. Someone returned attention to a body after life had left it. That attention matters. In a world of constant movement, burying a person cost effort. A group must spend time and energy on someone who no longer gathers food, carries children, shapes tools, or watches for danger. The ground may be hard, predators may be near, weather may be worsening. If the group is moving, stopping for the dead may create risk, yet the living sometimes do it anyway. This does not automatically prove religion in the later sense, with gods, doctrines, and formal ritual. It does not allow us to hear prayers or reconstruct beliefs, but it suggests that the dead could remain socially present. A body might be protected from scavengers, hidden from danger, marked with pigment, returned to the earth, or placed where the group could remember. What survives in the record suggests that death was not always treated as mere disposal. Bones showing care before death are equally revealing. A person with severe injury who lives long enough for healing must have crossed a dangerous threshold. Bone repair takes time. Infection must be avoided or survived. Food must reach the injured body. If the injury affects walking, chewing, carrying, or using the hands, then survival may depend on others. Not every healed wound proves compassion, and scholars rightly warn against turning every ancient skeleton into a sentimental story. A person can heal from some injuries without extraordinary support, but certain cases are difficult to explain without a social buffer. Individuals who survive serious impairment, advanced tooth loss, major trauma, or long-term disability in conditions where solitary life would likely be impossible. Their bones preserve not only damage, but a social fact. Someone, or several someones, allowed them to remain alive. This is one of the quiet revolutions hidden in the skeleton. Human survival may not rest only on the strongest hunters, the sharpest tools, or the boldest migrations. It may also rest on keeping vulnerable people within the group, a child born helpless, an injured adult, an elder with worn teeth, a person who can no longer travel quickly. All these bodies create demands, but they may also carry value that is not visible in muscle. Elders can remember water sources, seasonal routes, animal behavior, plant uses, old disasters, and the mistakes of the dead. A disabled person may still make tools, prepare food, care for children, process hides, maintain fire, or teach. Affection itself may have survival value, binding people together strongly enough that knowledge and care move across generations. The skeleton alone cannot prove love, but it can make indifference less convincing. A healed jaw, an old fracture, a body placed carefully after death. These are not soft details added to a harsh prehistoric world. They are part of the machinery of survival. Cooperation is not decoration. It is infrastructure. In a species with helpless children and dangerous births, social care is not optional for long. The bones of infants remind us how vulnerable human life begins. The bones of older individuals remind us that survival beyond immediate physical prime can matter. The group becomes a shelter built from bodies, memory, and obligation. Pigment deepens the mystery. Red ochre appears in many prehistoric contexts, sometimes with bodies, sometimes with tools, shells, stones, or worked surfaces. Red is an old colour in the human record. It can be practical, symbolic, decorative, or all of these depending on context. It may help in hide processing or adhesives. It may mark skin, objects, or places. It may evoke blood, life, earth, identity, or meanings that are completely lost to us. No single explanation fully accounts for its repeated presence. When ochre appears near human remains, the temptation is to read ritual immediately, but caution is necessary. Still, the repeated selection, transport, grinding, and use of pigment suggest that ancient humans often cared about surfaces and signs. They altered the visible world, and sometimes the dead seem to be drawn into that altered world. Burial also changes the relationship between people and landscape. A place where someone is buried is no longer just a shelter, cave, dune, or riverbank. It becomes attached to absence. Returning to that place may mean returning to a memory. Even if groups are mobile, they may move through known circuits, revisiting camps, water sources, stone outcrops, and seasonal grounds. The dead could become part of this mental map. A cave might hold more than shelter. A valley might hold more than food. The land begins to gather human past inside it, and the bones beneath the ground become anchors for belonging. Among Neanderthals, possible burials and care for injured individuals have long stirred debate. Some famous cases once seemed to prove elaborate ritual, then were questioned, revised, and reinterpreted as excavation methods improved and scientific standards changed. This uncertainty is not a weakness of the story, it is part of its honesty. Deep time evidence is difficult, and older discoveries were not always recorded with modern precision. Yet even cautious interpretations leave a picture of Neanderthals as socially complex beings, capable of surviving injury, returning to places, and possibly treating some dead with attention. Modern humans do not own grief as a private invention. For Homo sapiens, the record of burial, ornament, pigment, and care grows richer over time, though never evenly. Shell beads, pierced teeth, ochre, arranged bodies, and later cave art all point toward minds increasingly concerned with identity, connection, and unseen meaning. But the root of the matter may be simpler and older than ceremony. A body dies, and the living cannot treat it as nothing. They pause, they touch the earth, they remember. The skeleton becomes the centre of an act that leaves a trace not because death is rare, but because the response to death has become human in a deeper sense. The secret hidden inside bones is therefore not only endurance, it is attachment. The same species that crosses deserts, hunts dangerous animals, survives cold, and makes fire also carries the injured, feeds the weak, teaches the young, and sometimes buries the dead. These acts are easy to soften into poetry, but they are also practical foundations of survival. A group that remembers can plan. A group that cares can preserve knowledge through vulnerable bodies. A group that marks the dead may strengthen the bonds among the living. In the grave, the skeleton becomes more than an individual archive. It becomes evidence that humanity survived not by escaping fragility, but by organizing itself around it. The deeper the bones carry the story forward, the more strange the modern body begins to appear. it is easy to imagine that survival across 100,000 years should have produced a cleaner, stronger, more finished creature, as if time were a craftsman polishing away every weakness. But the skeleton does not show perfection. It shows compromises that were good enough under conditions that kept changing. The same upright spine that frees the hands can ache under ordinary living. The same narrow pelvis that helps efficient walking makes childbirth dangerous. The same small jaw that belongs to a changing face can crowd teeth until they twist, trap, or decay. The same light, mobile frame that helps long-distance movement can become fragile when movement disappears. Modern humans inherit ancient survival machinery, but they often use it in worlds it was not built to expect. For most of the long human past, the body grows inside motion. Children climb, squat, carry, run, dig, kneel, and walk over uneven ground. Adults move with seasons, food, water, fuel, animals, and danger. Bone responds to use. It thickens where pressure demands it and weakens where pressure fades. This is one reason many ancient hunter-gatherer skeletons can show impressive limb strength compared with later settled populations. The contrast should not be exaggerated into a fantasy of prehistoric health. Ancient life brought injury, parasites, infection, hunger, and early death. But in terms of mechanical loading, the ancient body often lived closer to the full range of what the skeleton can do. Modern life, especially sedentary life, removes much of that daily stress. The result is not comfort alone. It can be lost thinner bones, weaker muscles, altered posture, and joints that suffer not from too much wilderness, but from too little varied use. The turning point begins long before the modern city. It begins with agriculture, settlement, and the new bargain between food and the body. Farming allows more calories from smaller territories, larger populations, stored grain, permanent houses, and eventually towns, states, labour specialisation, and written history. But the bones reveal that this bargain is not free. In many early farming populations, skeletons show signs of nutritional stress, reduced stature, dental disease, and heavier burdens of infection compared with some earlier foraging groups. A diet based strongly on grains can be reliable, but it may also be narrower. Crowded settlements allow disease to move more easily. Living near domesticated animals creates new opportunities for pathogens. Repetitive labour leaves its own marks in joints and spines. Scholars still debate how much this varies by region, crop, class, and environment. But the broad pattern is clear enough to disturb simple stories of progress. Teeth become one of the loudest witnesses. With agriculture and later soft-processed foods, chewing demands change. Jaws that once developed under heavy mechanical use may grow with less stimulation. Teeth, still inherited from deeper patterns, may not fit as easily into smaller or differently developed jaws. Crowding, impaction, and dental disease become familiar human problems. Cavities increase in many farming societies because carbohydrate-rich diets feed oral bacteria in new ways. A toothache in the ancient world is not a minor inconvenience. It can become an abscess, an infection, a fever, a pathway toward death. The modern dentist makes this suffering easy to underestimate, but bones remember the time when a bad molar could become a serious threat. The spine carries another legacy of mismatch. It evolved under movement, load, and changing posture, not endless hours of stillness. The human back is remarkable, but it is not a flawless column. It balances the head, absorbs force, permits twisting and bending, and keeps the body upright over 2 feet. In ancient landscapes, this system is used constantly, sometimes brutally. In modern life, it may be trapped in chairs, bent over tools, screens, or repetitive work, then suddenly asked to perform intense activity without the gradual conditioning that older lives provided. Back pain is not simply a modern invention, and ancient people surely suffered it too. But the pattern of modern strain reveals how old compromises can become new vulnerabilities when the environment changes faster than biology. Even the triumph of long life exposes hidden weaknesses. Many ancient people died young by modern standards, not because aging did not exist, but because danger often arrived earlier. In the modern world, more people survive into ages where bone loss, arthritis, joint degeneration, and accumulated injuries become visible. This does not mean modernity has failed. Longer life is one of its great achievements, but it reveals that the skeleton carries parts not designed for endless ease. Hips wear, knees grind, vertebrae compress, teeth outlast or fail at different rates depending on diet, care, and chance. The longer the body lives, the more its ancient compromises are allowed to speak. There is also a hidden fragility created by success itself. Culture protects the body so effectively that natural pressures change. Shoes protect feet but can weaken some forms of natural foot use. Soft beds comfort the sleeper but alter posture and load. Abundant calories prevent famine but can create metabolic strain when paired with inactivity. Medicine saves injured people who would once have died, allowing lives to continue in ways that are deeply humane, but also revealing forms of chronic vulnerability that ancient bones rarely preserve, because many individuals never survived long enough to show them. What survives in the record suggests that the human body has always been adaptable. But adaptation is not the same as immunity from consequences. And yet it would be wrong to romanticize the past. The strong ancient limb bone may have belonged to someone with parasites, worn teeth, smoke-damaged lungs, and a healed fracture that hurt every winter. The modern skeleton may be less robust in some ways, but belongs to a person more likely to survive infection, childbirth, injury, and famine. The mystery is not whether the past or present body is better. The mystery is how the same skeleton can be both a masterpiece of survival and a collection of unresolved problems. No single explanation fully accounts for human fragility, because fragility comes from many sources: evolution's compromises, cultural change, longer life, diet, movement, disease, and the speed with which environments transform. Inside every modern body, then, the ancient story continues in quiet forms. A crowded wisdom tooth recalls a jaw shaped by old diets and new softness. An aching lower back recalls the cost of standing upright. Weak bones may recall a life too protected from the forces that once strengthened them. A difficult birth recalls the ancient bargain between walking and big brains. These are not defects outside the human story. They are the story, the skeleton that carried people through droughts, migrations, ice age nights, and vanished human worlds is still carrying us, but now through cities, chairs, processed food, artificial light, and lives long enough to feel the full weight of inheritance. The secret hidden inside human bones has never been only ancient. It is present each time the body reminds us that survival does not require perfection. It only requires a compromise that lasts long enough to become someone else's beginning. For all their power, bones are not confession. They do not tell the whole life. They do not preserve the sound of a person's language, the pattern of their laughter, the fear in a bad season, the taste of a remembered fruit, or the exact reason a group left one valley and entered another. A skeleton can carry climate, injury, diet, movement, ancestry, and care, but it cannot explain itself without the patience of those who read it. Even then, every reading is partial. The earth keeps some evidence and destroys more. A skull may survive while the hands are gone. Teeth may remain while the pelvis is dissolved. A grave may look deliberate until later disturbance complicates it. A tool may lie near a body and still not belong to that person in any meaningful way. The secret hidden inside bones is real, but it is never simple. It is written in a language where many words are missing. The first limit is preservation. A human body is not meant to last for 100,000 years. It must pass through a narrow chain of accidents to reach the present. Soil acidity can erase bone completely. Water can scatter remains. Carnivores can chew, drag, and break a skeleton before burial. Heat can crack bone. Pressure can crush it. Roots can enter it. Minerals can alter it. Later humans can dig through it without knowing what they disturb. The fossil record is therefore not a fair record of who lived. It favours certain environments, certain burials, certain accidents of geology, and certain places where modern researchers happen to look. Entire populations may be absent not because they were unimportant, but because their landscapes did not preserve them. This matters deeply when trying to reconstruct the human past. If more caves are excavated than open-air camps, cave life may seem more central than it was. If coastal sites are drowned by rising seas, inland sites may appear to dominate a story that once belonged partly to shorelines. If skeletons survive better in dry regions than humid forests, the ancient forest people become quieter in the record. What survives in the record suggests movement, adaptation, contact, and survival. But what does not survive may have been just as important. The silence around some places is not emptiness, it may be destruction. The second limit is interpretation. A mark on bone can have more than one cause. A fracture may come from a fall, a blow, an animal encounter, or post-burial damage. A cut mark may come from butchery, ritual treatment, violence, or disturbance, depending on its pattern and context. A line in tooth enamel shows stress during growth, but not necessarily the exact stress. A chemical signal may suggest diet or movement, but it can be blurred by contamination, local variation, or later mineral change. Scholars still debate many famous remains not because the evidence is useless, but because ancient evidence is dense with possibilities. A careful scientist must often speak in probabilities rather than certainties. This caution can feel frustrating because the human mind wants stories with clean edges. It wants to know whether a person was loved or abandoned, whether a death was peaceful or violent, whether a burial was ritual or practical, whether a migration succeeded or failed. Bones rarely give such gifts directly. They offer clues instead. A healed injury may suggest support, but the kind of support remains unknown. Pigment near a body may suggest symbolic treatment, but the meaning is gone. A skull shape may reveal ancestry, but not identity in the way the person understood it. Ancient DNA may reveal interbreeding between human groups, but not whether the meeting began with trust, fear, hunger, alliance, or force. The evidence can bring us close to the body, yet keep us far from the person. There is also a danger in making bones carry modern assumptions. Older studies sometimes forced ancient skeletons into rigid categories, using skull measurements to build racial hierarchies that were scientifically flawed and morally destructive. Modern anthropology has had to confront that legacy. Human variation is real, but it does not divide neatly into the old boxes people tried to impose on it. A skull is shaped by ancestry, growth, environment, diet, health, and chance. It is not a simple label. The lesson is important. Bones can reveal history, but they can also be misused when the reader brings the wrong story to them. The skeleton is honest in its own way. Interpretation is where error often enters. Another limit lies in scale. A skeleton is one life. A genetic study may describe thousands of lineages. An archaeological layer may represent repeated visits over centuries. These scales do not always align neatly. One extraordinary individual can be mistaken for a typical pattern. A population trend can erase the suffering or uniqueness of individual bodies. A tool tradition can continue while the people making it change through migration or mixture. A genetic shift can occur without obvious changes in artifacts. A cultural change can happen without a major biological replacement. No single explanation fully accounts for all the layers of evidence, because each layer records a different part of life. Even dates can be more fragile than they appear. Dating methods are powerful, but they depend on context, material, preservation, and calibration. A bone may be dated directly, or the sediment around it may be dated, or associated charcoal may provide the age of a fire that may or may not be exactly linked to the body. Layers can be disturbed. Older materials can be moved into younger contexts. Younger intrusions can enter older deposits. A few thousand years may not sound like much beside 100,000, but in human evolution it can change the interpretation of who met whom, who arrived first, and which technology belonged to which group. Time itself must be handled carefully. Yet these limits do not weaken the story. They make it more profound. The mystery of human bones is not that they answer everything. It is that they answer anything at all after so much time. A tooth survives and reveals childhood stress. A femur preserves a lifetime of movement. A skull fragment carries ancestry. A jaw from a cold plateau changes what is known about vanished humans. A small finger bone reveals the Denisovans. These are not complete biographies. They are openings. They allow the dead to return not as characters in a perfect story, but as presences at the edge of knowledge. The things bones cannot say are also part of the human past. They remind us that ancient people were not specimens first. They were living beings whose inner worlds are mostly lost. They watched weather change without knowing ice core curves or isotope ratios. They touched the injured without leaving a record of intention. They buried some dead for reasons that may have blended grief, fear, memory, habit, and belief in ways no modern category can fully hold. They moved across landscapes that have since drowned, dried, forested, frozen, or vanished. The skeleton gives us the structure of survival. Around it once existed an entire life of meanings that time has taken away. So the secret hidden inside bones is surrounded by another secret, the silence around them. Science can narrow the silence. It can measure, compare, sequence, date, scan, and reconstruct. It can reject fantasies and sharpen uncertainty into knowledge. But it cannot restore everything. There will always be vanished gestures, lost names, unrecorded songs, forgotten fears, and decisions made in the dark between one camp and another. The bones remain, not as final answers, but as the last durable edge of lives that were once whole. To read them well is to accept both their testimony and their refusal. They bring us closer to the ancient dead than almost anything else can, and then they stop, leaving the rest to careful imagination and humility. The final secret is not buried only in caves, graves, deserts, or frozen sediments. It is still moving beneath living skin. Every modern body carries a deep record that began long before writing, long before farming, long before any person stood before a wall and carved a king's name into stone. The skeleton that seems ordinary in a mirror is the result of vanished climates, lost migrations, dangerous births, healed injuries, ancient diets, forgotten shorelines, and meetings with other humans whose faces are mostly gone. It is tempting to imagine the past as something outside us, locked in museums and excavation trenches, but the body refuses that distance. The past is not only behind us, it is inside the curve of the spine, the shape of the jaw, the length of the leg, the grip of the hand, the thickness of bone, the immune system's inherited memories, and the fragile architecture that allows a child to stand upright and walk into a world already filled with ghosts. This is what makes human bones so unsettling. They do not simply prove that ancient people existed, they prove that the living are made from the consequences of ancient survival. Somewhere in the long darkness of time, a child endured hunger and grew into an ancestor. Somewhere, an injured person healed because the body repaired itself, and perhaps because others kept them alive long enough for repair to matter. Somewhere, a group crossed a dry corridor before it closed, or remained near a wetland when the open plains failed, or followed a coast that now lies beneath the sea. Somewhere, modern humans met Neanderthals or Denisovan-related people, and from those meetings came traces still present in living descendants. The evidence remains incomplete, but the broad truth is unavoidable. No living person is the product of a single clean line. Everyone is a convergence of survivals. The bones also reveal that humanity's greatest inheritance is not domination, but endurance under uncertainty. Ancient humans rarely know the full scale of the forces shaping them. They do not know that glaciers are expanding across continents, that sea levels are falling, that a desert will one day become green and then desert again, that a small population loss may echo in genomes tens of thousands of years later. They know weather, hunger, birth, injury, distance, and the behavior of animals. They know the feel of stone in the hand and smoke in the eyes. They know the pressure of deciding whether to remain or move. Their bodies answer these pressures without ever knowing they are becoming evidence. A femur thickens. A tooth records stress. A skull carries ancestry. A healed fracture becomes the visible edge of an invisible social world. And inside the modern skeleton, those ancient answers remain imperfect. The human body is still a compromise between competing needs. It must walk upright and give birth. It must house a large brain and feed it. It must chew, speak, breathe, balance, lift, carry, heal, and age. It is capable of extraordinary journeys, yet vulnerable to a fall, an infection, a blocked birth, a failing tooth, a winter without food, modern medicine, shelter, agriculture. And technology have changed the terms of survival, but they have not erased the old design. In some ways, they reveal it more clearly. A back that aches in a chair belongs to an upright animal shaped by movement. Crowded teeth belong to a face altered by long changes in diet and growth. Bones weakened by stillness belong to a skeleton that once expected daily force from the world. The ancient body has not disappeared. It has simply been placed in surroundings it could not have imagined. The living body also carries traces of vanished relatives. Neanderthals and Denisovans are not present as complete peoples anymore, and it would be wrong to romanticize their disappearance into a comforting story of continuity. Their languages, gestures, social worlds, and most of their bodies are gone. Yet fragments remain in modern genomes, sometimes influencing immune responses, adaptation, or inherited risk in ways still being studied. Scholars still debate the full meaning of many of these inherited variants, and no single explanation fully accounts for why some endured while others faded. But their presence changes the emotional weight of extinction. A vanished human group can be gone from the landscape and still not be entirely absent from the living body. The dead can leave instructions. This legacy is not only biological, it is behavioral. The ancient dependence on learning, care, and shared memory still defines human life. A person survives infancy because others protect them. Knowledge still moves between generations. Tools still extend the body. Fire has become electricity. Stone blades have become machines. Shelters have become cities. But the pattern beneath them is old. Human beings remain animals that build worlds around their weaknesses. The difference is scale. Where a small camp once held warmth against a cold night, modern civilization holds vast networks of food, medicine, language, transport, and memory against dangers too large for one body to face alone. Yet the foundation is familiar, fragile bodies cooperating long enough for knowledge to outlive them. The secret hidden inside human bones is therefore not a single answer. It is not one lost migration, one ancient disaster, one vanished species, or one evolutionary trick. It is a layered archive of pressure and response. Bones show that humans were shaped by climate, but not ruled by it completely. They were changed by migration, but not defined only by movement. They survived through tools, but also became dependent on them. They endured injury, but often through care. They met other humans, absorbed traces of them, and continued into a future those relatives did not share. They became modern not in one sudden awakening, but through repeated survival across narrowing passages. What survives in the record suggests a humbler story than the one people often prefer. Humanity did not rise because it was untouched by fragility. It survived because fragility became organized around families, camps, fires, tools, memory, and the strange ability to imagine what is not immediately present. The skeleton is the durable remainder of that organization. It is bone-shaped by weather, but also by work. It is injury-shaped by risk, but also by healing. It is ancestry shaped by separation, but also by contact. It is loss shaped by extinction, but also by inheritance. 100,000 years are hidden there, not as a clean message, but as a pressure still felt in the living frame. Every person who stands, walks, carries, remembers, heals, or grows old is carrying the long answer forward. The story quiets at the edge of the body. After all the climates, migrations, vanished relatives, broken bones, buried dead, and drowned coastlines, what remains is something almost too ordinary to notice: a hand opening, a spine straightening, feet touching the ground, breath moving through a chest built from ancient compromises. The deep past does not need to announce itself loudly. It waits in the small mechanics of being alive. It waits in the way bone repairs after injury, in the way children must be held, in the way memory passes from one person to another, because no single life is long enough to carry everything alone. The people who lived 100,000 years ago are mostly beyond recovery. Their names are gone. If names like ours existed, their songs are gone. Their fears have no direct voice. The places they knew have shifted, dried, flooded, forested, frozen, or disappeared under modern seas. Even their bones survive only rarely, as fragments spared by chance. Yet those fragments are enough to remind us that the human story is not made only from monuments and written records. It is made from bodies that endured before history learned to write itself down. Somewhere, an ancient person looked across a landscape that no longer exists and made a decision without knowing its consequence. To stay, to leave, to carry a child, to tend a fire, to follow water, to help the injured, to bury the dead. Most of those decisions vanished the moment they were made, but their effects travelled onward through generations until they reached the present, quiet and unannounced. So the bones beneath the earth are not only remains, they are thresholds. They mark the place where a life once stood between danger and continuation. They tell us that survival is rarely grand while it is happening. It is usually small, physical, uncertain, and shared. A meal found before hunger becomes fatal. A wound that closes. A route remembered. A child kept warm through the night. A body lowered into the ground by hands that still had to go on living. And now, after the long passage of time, the final image is not a fossil under glass, but a living person standing beneath the same sky, carrying within their bones the faint memory of ice, dust, fire, migration, loss, and care. The ancient world is gone, but it has not fully left us. It rests quietly inside the frame that holds us upright, waiting in silence, as patient as bone,